This week on Double Plus Good, Adria Richards learns that big dongles equal big trouble, and Susan Wilson finds out that mo money equals mo problems. So we've got two really interesting stories to start out with here that happened in the last half of March. The first one deals with PyCon 2013. PyCon 2013, for anybody who's unfamiliar, is a Python programming language convention. It's held for about a week in Santa Clara, California. It's a place that hobbyists, enthusiasts, people in the industry, in IT, they go to it. It's for people who enjoy the programming language, not necessarily somewhere you'd find a layman or a novice, but somebody who's somewhat adept at using this, or who's related or somehow tangentially related to the tech industry would find themselves there. This year in attendance happened to be somebody by the name of Adria Richards. She worked for a company called SendGrid. Now, SendGrid is a company that's located in California. She was an employee of SendGrid, what you'd call, or what she described as, a technology evangelist, which is just a really nice way of putting a spin on a PR person. She does networking, she goes and meets people in the industry, she tries to get people enthused about using SendGrid and the related products and services. That's what she does. Technology evangelist is just some way of spinning your resume to make it look like you've done more than you actually have. But at its heart, it's a PR person. So she uses Twitter and Facebook and the internet, and she reaches out to different people in IT and she tries to get them interested. That's her job. So she was doing all these different conventions. Apparently, this is according to her. And PyCon happened to be the last one. I believe it was the fifth that she was going to before she made her way back home. And so while attending at PyCon, she happened to be waiting for the next speaker up on stage who was going to give their presentation. And lo and behold, behind her, Commander Riker and Wesley Crusher made some comments that really upset her. Now, these two individuals, who you can see pictured here, now this picture actually showed up on her Twitter. We'll get to that. But these two individuals, the gentleman on the right and the left, were having a private conversation between themselves, and they were making some jokes. There's nothing untoward or unheard of. They were just joking around, they're dicking around, they're blowing off some steam, they're killing time, they're waiting for the next speaker to get up there, and they made a couple of jokes about things related to IT. One happened to be dongles, which is a funny word, and they were making some stupid, crude jokes about it, and the other was about forking repos. Again, these are both terms that people in IT would be familiar with. It's nothing that's weird. I mean, maybe you've not heard of these things before, but if you were a person in attendance at PyCon, I guarantee you'd know what they were talking about, and you'd get the jokes. Now, they may have been sexual in a nature, but they weren't sexist. That's a differentiation that's going to become important later on. So, Adria happened to be sitting in front of him. She heard this, or misheard this, and she became offended. She became upset. Now, this would be the point where anybody in a professional situation, whether it's at a convention or even at the office, who's had to deal with other people in a work environment, would take the mature route. They'd be diplomatic. This is what you do in a job. You have to relate to people that might be different than you are, that might have a different sensibility or sense of humor than you do. And as an adult, you have to be able to relate to them, especially as a technology evangelist. As somebody in her position, her self-described position, she needs to be able to approach all sorts of different people and to relate and communicate with them. This would have been the perfect opportunity for her to show off her skills. She could have turned around and said, excuse me, I found that offensive. Could you tone it down a little bit? Or could you hold off on the jokes? Or even she could have just turned around and said, stop it. I mean, she could have handled it a number of ways. I just want you to put yourself in her position. Imagine yourself at a convention or even in the office. Now, again, this isn't necessarily work, but I'm using the office place scenario because I think a lot of people can relate to that. But I want you to try to imagine yourself in a similar situation. Somebody makes an offhand comment, and you're offended from it for whatever reason. Now, let's say you decide not to go to HR, but to confront them. There are a number of ways to do this. I mean, everybody's been in a situation like this. This is something you've learned from junior high on upward. It's part of people skills. It's part of relating to other people. Now, instead of doing that, instead of saying, hey, could you cool it down, or hey, could you not make comments like that? It makes me uncomfortable, or I just don't think it's appropriate. She decided to be vindictive about it. She turns around, she smiles at the two gentlemen, and she snaps a picture. Now, this on its own wouldn't be a big deal, but what you have to know about Adria Richards is, again, in her position working for SendGrid, she knows a lot of people in the IT industry. She happens to have a Twitter account that's related to her work account. Now, she identified as a SendGrid employee, she talked about SendGrid on the account, and she had tens of thousands of followers. I believe 13,000 to 14,000 at the time this happened. Now, these people who would be following her more than likely would be following her because they've had some kind of relationship with her, or they worked for a company that interrelated with her or her company, and so this is kind of like a networked thing. This isn't like a normal Twitter account where it's just some random schmo that you're following. This is somebody related to the business that you're engaged in. So she sent out a tweet to 13,000 people in the industry that these two gentlemen are in, and said, and I'll put the tweet itself up. It says, "Not cool, jokes about forking repos in a sexual way and big dongles right behind me at PyCon." And then she posts the picture, obviously. Now, right off the bat, we have a few issues with this. This tweet she's sending out, if you take a look, it doesn't clearly identify who she's talking about. Now, later on, she'll go on in a blog post to explain specifically who she's talking about, and they'll, in turn, respond to her. But as it stands, this tweet identifies all of the people that you can see. Now, I can identify individually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people. 7 specific people that can be picked out outside of this mass of people that you can individually spot. Now, she doesn't differentiate who said what. She's just saying, look at these people making sexual jokes. Again, she's tweeting this out to 13,000 people in the industry. I mean, this is libelous if you ask me. I mean, she's essentially slandering them. She's saying, oh my God, look at these people making these comments. Well, who are they? You're not identifying who. You're just saying behind you. All of these people are behind you. You know, that leads to sticky situations. And this plays into, I believe, one of the other reasons that SendGrid will react the way they will in the 24-hour cycle after this event. So she sends out this tweet, right? She smears these two guys and, frankly, all the other people sitting around them. And then she proceeds to contact PyCon staff. Now, if she hadn't sent this tweet, if she decided she doesn't like conflict, she can't interrelate with people, even considering her position at this company, and that's what she's supposed to do, interrelate with people. If she just decided, I can't handle it, I don't want to confront these two gentlemen, I don't know how they're going to react, she could have just gone to the PyCon staff, and that's what she does next. She goes to them and says, hey, there are a couple people making comments that are making me uncomfortable, deal with it. Now, the PyCon staff, the people she had talked to, pull these gentlemen aside, they say, hey, we've received a complaint, somebody was uncomfortable with some of the comments you were making, and they proceed to apologize. They say, you know what, we're sorry. It was a private conversation. We didn't intend to offend anybody. It wasn't targeted at anybody in particular. It was just a conversation between myself and the gentleman next to me. They offered up a sincere apology to her, and that's where it should have ended. Again, the first thing she should have done as an adult, and then secondly as a person with the kind of position at a company that she has, is simply turn around and say, please, could you stop it? Now, she didn't do that. She could have just gone to PyCon and said, hey, they're making me uncomfortable, and then let PyCon deal with it. Again, that would have been another alternative, and that on its own would have been fine. But she doesn't stop there. After she sends out this tweet, after she talks to PyCon, she proceeds to create a blog post and try to turn this into an issue that it's not. It's no longer about two gentlemen having a conversation that had some saucy language in it, or that made a few jokes that she felt uncomfortable with. It now becomes a much larger issue. So she creates a blog post on her website, But You're a Girl is the name of it, and this is from March 18th, called Forking and Dongle Jokes Don't Belong at Tech Conferences, where she proceeds to discuss how horrible this was. Now, the language she uses when she's talking about this sets herself up as a hero, which is very awkward. I mean, I've been around groups of people who've made comments that have made me uncomfortable, but I wouldn't consider myself being subjected to those conversations. I wouldn't consider myself to be a hero for withstanding it. I mean, that's just part of being an adult. You deal with shit you're uncomfortable with. You deal with stuff that might make you uncomfortable as a person. That's just part of life. You're not a hero for putting up with it. You're an adult. You're like everybody else, especially in a business situation, especially at a convention related to the business that you're engaged in. It's just part of interrelating with people. It's just part of dealing with other viewpoints and other senses of humor and different sensibilities. I mean, you've got to have a thicker skin than to take offense at everything and try to run to some authority to handle all your problems. That's not how you're an innovator. That's not how you lead a company in your industry. So she sets herself up as a hero. She compares herself to Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc, a woman who was set on fire for her beliefs. I mean, Adria Richards is not Joan of Arc. She's nothing like Joan of Arc. The situation is nothing like what Joan of Arc went through. This isn't in France. She didn't hear the voice of God. The clergy isn't condemning her. She's not being put on a stake to be burned to death. trying to create some kind of a parallel between some horrific execution that some French girl endured and a couple of guys making a joke about a fucking dongle is insane. But this is the picture she tries to paint. She wants to make herself seem like the victim. She wants to turn this into not an issue of what's appropriate or inappropriate at a convention or in a work environment. She wants to turn that, instead of being an issue about that, she wants to turn it into, oh my God, I am being oppressed by these males who are making these comments that are making me uncomfortable. She goes on to say that that's the reason she spoke up. She saw a picture of a little girl on stage, and she said, oh my God, this little girl will never be able to get into the tech industry with people like this, referring to the two gentlemen, making comments like this. That's ridiculous. That is a ridiculous assertion. A private conversation between two individuals, whether you overheard it or not, is not going to be a barrier to entry into something that somebody has an interest in. I don't give a shit if some hobby or some interest that I have has a group of people related to it that make comments that make me uncomfortable. I'm interested in the hobby, not in those people. To say that a girl has such thin skin that she couldn't possibly go into the tech industry because she heard an offensive comment belittles women. It's saying that women are different than men, that there really isn't parity, that there isn't equality, that women are different and need to be coddled and need to be protected. That's ridiculous. That's anti-feminism. That's anti-egalitarian. The argument she's setting up is, oh my God, poor me, I need to be coddled, I need to be protected. So as a result of all of this, as a result of her putting up this blog post and these pictures and these tweets, one of the individuals gets fired. Now they get fired from a company that basically releases a statement that they don't condone what this employee said. This gentleman happens to have 3 children. You know, he's got a family he's supporting. He's lost his job because a woman overheard a conversation where 2 people were making jokes to one another that didn't relate to her, that wasn't targeted to her, that wasn't sexist in any way, it was related to the industry, and he lost his job to support his family because she took offense to it, because she found it offensive. And that is disgusting on any level that you could consider it. It is ridiculous to believe that because she was offended that he should lose his job. Now the tweets between her and this individual, because he posted an apology. He actually tried to be mature about this. He went out and he said, you know what, I'm sorry, maybe I shouldn't have done it, perhaps it was inappropriate, and I apologize. He was a man. He stepped up to the plate and he said, I'm sorry. And this is regardless of him losing his job, he still apologized. Her response to him was, oh well, you know, so sorry, see you at the next convention. Just unbelievable. She doesn't care about him or about his family. She doesn't care about the effects that her actions have on other individuals. She is self-absorbed, narcissistic, egocentric. That is Adria Richards to a T. Well, as you can imagine, the internet didn't take too kindly to this. Mostly 4chan, boards like GB and Poll. And then you've got Reddit and other sites too picked up on this. And to tell the truth, a lot of different websites were pissed off. And it wasn't just the user base at these websites. An interesting thing that began to happen was different women in the IT industry themselves took offense to this. They said, what you've done is set us back. You've portrayed the image that women are weak, that they're oversensitive, that they're going to tattle on you the second they become offended about something. And that hurts us, because the next time I, as a woman, go for an interview to get a job in the IT industry, they're not going to look at my resume or my skills or who I am as a person. They're going to think of this story. They're going to think of Adria Richards. And they're going to think, I don't want a person who's going to be oversensitive and hear something and get offended by it and go to HR or go to a news station or just go off the deep end and create an issue where there isn't one and not handle it in an adult way. So multiple websites get upset and they begin digging through her history. And they find some very interesting things related to Adria Richards. Namely, again, this comes back to this Twitter account she was using. This tweet. Now, as you can see here, if you read this, it's fairly clear. This is a sexual nature. Not any different than what these two individuals were talking about. Now, some people have pointed out and said, okay, wait. All right, so she made a sexual comment about putting socks in your pants, obviously related to how endowed a male is, and making a TSA agent faint. But the difference is she's on Twitter and these two were at a convention. Right, and they're there because it's work related, and she's just on her Twitter doing her own thing. Again, a key point here to remember is this Twitter is related to her work. Her line of work uses this Twitter account, so it is like she's at work. She had SendGrid listed up there. She talked about being a technology evangelist. She sent out business-related tweets. This isn't a segregated private Twitter. This is her official work Twitter. That's the difference. They are related. And so you can see the blatant hypocrisy here of Adria Richards saying these two individuals can't make this comment, but she can go on her Twitter and she can do the same goddamn thing, the same exact thing. They're talking about big dongles. That's big dicks. She's talking about putting socks in your pants because it's a big dick. It is the same thing. They're making dick jokes. They're just using different words to fluff it up. And yet she can run around and say that because she's a woman, this is sexist and this is a barrier for entry into the IT field. You know, she felt so bad about that little girl on stage. A dick joke is going to make it impossible for her to get into technology some way, somehow. And yet she's doing the same thing. What about that little girl? What if she read Adria Richards' Twitter? Saw that TSA tweet? Is she going to be barred from entering the technology industry because Adria Richards is making cock jokes? This is just ridiculous. And as more and more information came out, it came out that Adria had made other comments talking about how white people can't be the victims of racism, that only black people can. You can see that her language and her attitudes are extraordinarily charged. When you look at her Twitter. She's making sexual jokes, she's making statements about race, and this is all on a business account. Well, as you can imagine, SendGrid wasn't too enthused about this. Now, they may have been able to duck the issue until she said, SendGrid supports me. When she sent that tweet out, that was it. That was a death sentence for her career. She might as well have just executed it herself and stuck a gun in its mouth. You cannot tie your employer into your shenanigans. That is the worst thing you can possibly do, regardless of the industry you're working in. But that's exactly what she did. So, of course, now SendGrid's backed into a corner. They're getting flooded from people on different websites saying, oh my God, how can you employ this woman? Look at this stupid hypocrisy. Look at how she's treating this individual. This guy lost his job. This is ridiculous. This isn't a reflection of how women in tech should be. So SendGrid cuts her loose. So what is the end result here? I mean, what the hell happened? At the end of the day, when you look at this situation, what you find out is Adria Richards is a drama queen. She is used to being coddled and getting her way. She wanted to go and, sound the alarm for sexism. She wanted to try to wrap herself in a feminist flag and say that she's being oppressed. But at the end of the day, that's all hyperbole. It's all bullshit. She's no different than those two men. She made the same kind of comments, and she acted immaturely. Nobody wants to employ a person who's going to behave like this. I wouldn't want my company associated with it. So SendGrid cut her loose. She got shit canned. I mean, her own actions led to her being fired. Now, if that was the only thing that happened, this would be comical. But again, this guy lost his job. That is fucking ridiculous. I want you to think of yourself being at a convention, having a quiet, private conversation, whispering something to the person sitting next to you, regardless of if that person's a man or a woman or a black or white, it doesn't matter. But then having somebody overhear that and not engaging you as a fucking person, not talking to you like you're an adult, instead running to tattle to the teacher. Oh, you said a bad word, I'm going to go tell Miss Johnson on you. I mean, that's what this woman did. And that was the event of PyCon 2013. I mean, it's a story of two people getting fired because one person wanted to act like a child. It's another example of the overreach of these radical feminists who try to turn everything into an issue of oppression. It was a sexual joke, a private sexual joke. Maybe not appropriate, maybe it was appropriate, who knows. She should have just been an adult. She should have turned around and said, stop it, or she should have just talked to PyCon on its own. But she wanted to be vindictive about it. She wanted to try to shame these people. She wanted to make herself a hero in a situation that didn't call for a hero. She wanted to turn this into something about patriarchy and misogyny. And in the end, she ended up getting herself fired. I mean, that's the internet and the mob mentality is a double-edged sword. And she learned that the hard way. So let's move on from the events of PyCon 2013 and Adria Richards and talk about Susan Wilson. Now, Susan Wilson was the mother of Mackenzie Wilson, a 9-year-old girl who had a Kickstarter that drew a bit of ire from the internet. The Kickstarter in question, and it's still up and you can take a look at this, is 9-year-old building an RPG to prove her brothers wrong. Its intended goal was to send Mackenzie to a game development camp. Now, the camp in question isn't anything too technologically advanced. We're not talking about high-level programming. This is more along the lines of RPG Maker. The kids go in, it's a 3 to 4 day event, they learn a little bit about programming and how game development works, and at the end of the week, once it's run its course, they maybe have something to bring back home to show the family. Now, the initial goal that was listed on the Kickstarter was $829. That in itself isn't where the controversy comes from. The controversy itself actually centers around Susan Wilson, not her daughter Mackenzie. When you first hear about a Kickstarter like this, you think, oh, that's great. A kid wants to learn about game development. I don't see any problem with it. However, when you actually go to the Kickstarter page and you see the narrative that's been presented, and it's important too to remember that Mackenzie, being 9 years old, couldn't start the Kickstarter. She actually had to have an adult consent and set up the account and set up the web page itself, what you'd expect. And so obviously the mother would step in and help her set it up and probably write it as well. That's where it starts to get kind of weird. When you visit the page and you see the narrative that's presented, it's shaped in a way to draw attention to a hot button issue. It would be hard to miss on the internet in the past, I'd say 4 to 5 years, be it technology or video games, politics or social activism, the heavy undercurrent of feminism that's sort of ingratiated itself into every single issue that exists out there. Now, Susan Wilson, when she was shaping this Kickstarter, uses that as leverage to draw attention for her daughter. Now you might be saying, well, maybe I can't fault her for that. She's just trying to help her kid out, right? The kid just wants to go to, video game development camp. What's the problem with that? Who cares how the mother approaches people for it? Well, she just wants to help her kid out, and at the end of the day, who does that really hurt? Well, I can tell you 2 people it hurts to start with. Her 2 sons, who she uses as the villains in this narrative to help her daughter out. Now, when you visit the page, you'll see this narrative that's presented. It's not just that the little girl wants to go to RPG camp. No, it's that the little girl wants to go to RPG camp because her big, bad, teenage older brothers are oppressing her and telling her, hey, silly, girls can't do technology, you're stupid, you can't get into this, this isn't a field that applies to you. And so this little girl is going to prove them wrong by earning the money herself and then going off and going to RPG camp. But the truth of the matter is, and I mean really, when we're talking about Kickstarter, it's not even that she's raising the money. Let's be honest here, you're begging for it. That's what Kickstarter essentially is. It's a formal way of begging people for money. But this story that she presents, I mean, even from the onset, when you first go to the page, the first thing you're going to notice below the title itself is the picture. Here's this, little girl on the left versus her douchebag older brothers. One's shirtless and the other's got a shit-eating grin on his face, and oh boy, I bet they hate that little girl. Of course, one of the awkward things is the first picture you see of these 2 boys, one of them's wearing a shirt that says, I think I'm a lesbian. Now that's crazy on its own. But that again goes into who Susan Wilson is, and we'll touch on that a little bit later. But I mean, even the tagline that's presented for this, it says right off the start, mean older brothers say she can't, so my daughter's proving them wrong by building her own RPG and paying for it. She set this up, and really it's from here on out that things begin to get a little weird. This goes beyond just a kid wanting to go to RPG camp. Susan Wilson has crafted this to appeal to the most amount of people possible using a hot button issue. Feminism. It's everywhere. It's infiltrated everything. We just talked about Adria Richards, and you can see how that played a pivotal role in the events that surrounded her. So here's Susan Wilson, a self-described entrepreneur, who's going to try to use it to raise as much cash as she can. And again, you're saying, well, I thought she was just sending her daughter to RPG camp. What's the problem? Well, the initial stated goal was $829. The current money raised as of this date is over $33,000. And even when you're looking at the pledge amounts, this is where it starts to get a little weird. You'd figure, okay, well, if you have an initial stated goal of $800 or $829, you'd have a couple of different pledge orders. And for those who don't know how Kickstarter works, essentially somebody puts forward an idea, and you can decide if you want to donate to it. And if you do donate to it, they have what they call pledge levels. So if you give $5 or $10 or $20, you get something back in return. Now they'll structure this so the least amount of money will get you the smallest thing, and the highest amount of money will get you something, more spectacular. So if it were a video game, for instance, and you donated, let's say, $25, you might get a digital copy of the game when it's released. But if you say donated, I don't know, $1,000, you'd be at a higher pledge level, and you'd probably get your name in the credits. So that's kind of the give and take of how this is structured. So when people give money, they get something in return. Now that's not a guarantee the project will be completed. However, it's some kind of an assurance that, hey, if you give me money and help me out on this thing, I'm going to give you something in return. So okay, the initial stated goal is let's send her to RPG camp. So what are the pledge levels? Well, the first couple are, she'll thank you. And the game's credits. $5 you'll get thing. $10 you'll receive a copy of any game that she happens to make. $15, and it goes on and on. $25, a deluxe mouse pad and the game. So the basic kind of bundles that you would expect. Nothing too spectacular, it's just a kid making an RPG Maker game. However, once you get up to the $100, $250, $300 limit, you start to think, okay, well, it's getting kind of high there. And especially when you see that there are limits. Now you can put limits on pledge amounts. So even at the $300 pledge level, she has a limit of 10 people. So you've got to ask yourself, well wait, if 10 people gave $300, that's $3,000. That's nearly that's over 3 times the amount of money she's asking for. So that doesn't really make any sense. Why would she have that many slots for that donation level? But it doesn't stop there. She actually has a pledge level for $10,000. Somebody actually backed that. That level, that money level, this is what it gets you. Rockstar reward level. At this level, you get everything from the previous levels, plus a personal apology from her brothers, and the satisfaction of knowing you not only started her career, you've helped to fund the future courses in computer programming that will help her get better at game development. So this woman has set up a narrative where the boys are evil. The boys are bad, and they're oppressing this little innocent girl. And if you give them $10,000, she's going to make her sons apologize to you? This is a Kickstarter about sending a little girl to game development camp. Why in the hell would I get an apology from 2 boys who aren't even related to that? She's essentially whoring out her kids. You pay me money, and I'll make my kids do something for you. It has a very sick feeling to it. I mean, she's already painted them as villains, and now she's going to punish them even more by making them apologize to a complete stranger just because that stranger paid? I mean, what kind of impact does that have on a kid, regardless of if they're a teenager or a boy or a girl? What kind of parent does that? And so it's things like this that I think drew attention to this kind of a Kickstarter. It's this fake narrative, this girl power, feminist idea that was thrown out there. And this, we'll show those boys, and we're going to make those boys apologize. And it just comes off as very shallow and very vapid, and it comes off as a woman looking to do whatever she can to raise money. Well, this again plays into who Susan Wilson is. And so people got a sort of uncomfortable feeling about this, and so different websites started to kind of look into her background to see what they could find. One website in particular, NeoGAF, happened to have a couple of threads about this. One in particular had a good deal of information located in it, and it kind of shows what they were able to dig up about Susan Wilson. So what exactly did they find? Well, they found out quite a bit of interesting information about Susan Wilson. The first thing, and the most interesting piece of information to kind of come to light, is essentially that she's a millionaire. Or at least that's the conclusion that a lot of people have come to. Now, she's given an interview recently with Kotaku, which she's denied these claims. However, the information that was gathered and the different sources that were found contradict her official line on this. So where exactly is this contradiction coming from? Well, one of the pieces of information found was the Judgment Group, of which Susan Wilson is the founder and CEO. An interesting fact about Susan Wilson and the Judgment Group itself is that she was named in Fortune's list of the top 10 most powerful female entrepreneurs. Now, this is Fortune that's listing this. This isn't some random blog. This isn't some accolade from some unsourced place. It's Fortune that's saying that she is a powerful female entrepreneur. Another piece of information that came to light was in regards to the selling of a domain. Basically, in the early 2000s, Kinkos.com was registered with her and a group that she was associated with, and it was later sold to Kinkos itself, and some of the sums that have been thrown out there seem exorbitant, and it's hard to believe. One of the numbers was $100 million. Even myself, I'm slightly incredulous about the idea that she would have gotten $100 million for a simple domain name. But, if you think a few $1,000,000, that's not so out of the ballpark. It's obvious that she was making money and running successful businesses for quite some time, for the last decade. So it seems obvious that Susan Wilson is a capable entrepreneur. She's made money. This, as you can imagine, pissed off a lot of people. I mean, here's a woman who seemingly has a vast amount of capital, who is using Kickstarter for her daughter for an $829 trip, when it would seem that she could easily afford that. Why would she be using Kickstarter in this way? It just doesn't make sense. She has the money. Why use Kickstarter? Well, this is where people begin to piece together their own narrative on what exactly is going on here. Susan Wilson has made comments in the past regarding crowdsourcing, and saying that there were flaws with it, and saying that it could, be easily scammed, and she didn't see a real value to it. The opinion that a lot of people have come to is she decided that, you know what, you can actually make a lot of money doing crowdsourcing. In fact, she's right, you can scam it. And so it seems that she's doing just that. In fact, this isn't the first project that Susan Wilson has put forward. She's had a couple on multiple sites. She ran one on Indiegogo called Girls Afraid of Money, $20 Experiment Continued. That had a stated goal of $10,000. She only raised $19.60 on it. And more interestingly was the Cape Project. Now, the Cape Project was one that was completely unsuccessful. It had a goal stated of $20,000. It ended up getting, I believe, 6 backers, around $400. It came in well short. One of the more striking things about the Cape Project Kickstarter, and this is the one that preceded Mackenzie's RPG Maker Camp one, is the video that's attached to it. When you read through the Kickstarter itself, it says, "Who hasn't wished they could fly custom superhero capes, personalized, exquisitely crafted, handmade by U.S. veteran family business?" When you watch the video that's actually attached on the page, you come to the conclusion that these aren't fucking capes. These look like Target grade beach towels that these kids have wrapped around their neck. Now, she's actually gone to the point of saying she's going to have veterans' families handcraft you capes. And when you look at these things, I implore you to go look at the video yourself. When you look at these things, these are not handcrafted capes. These weren't made by a veteran's family. These are cheap knockoff towels, probably made in China by some sweatshop worker who's making 5 cents an hour. And yet she's going to try to exploit people and put into the Kickstarter that, oh, you're supporting a veteran family. I mean, it's simply outrageous when you really think about it, that she would go to the point of trying to appeal to people by saying that she's supporting veterans and their families, pull on their heartstrings and say, oh geez, these are made by a U.S. veteran family. Don't you support America? Don't you support our troops? So when you go to this Kickstarter, the first thing you see is the project name, the stated goal, the video, and then the tagline talking about a U.S. veteran family. But when you're reading through it, it's just simply she wants to start another business. And she, has gone out of her way to try to viral this. There are pictures of her kids trying to do essentially a planking version of them wearing the cape. The planking fad that was around for about, 3 or 4 months. It was everywhere on Twitter and Facebook. And essentially she's trying to get her kids to do the same thing, but wearing a cape this time, as if that's somehow going to appeal to teenagers and that they're going to need to, automatically go buy a cape so they can take part in this awesome new fad. So it seemed the more people dug around, the more it became clear that not only does Susan Wilson have a good amount of wealth, maybe she's not, a multi-millionaire, but I mean, she has pictures of her with Warren Buffett. She's had a successful business. She's been named in Fortune. She's had multiple projects she started recently on different crowdsourcing sites like Indiegogo and Kickstarter. And it seems like she will say whatever she has to say to make money. As you might imagine, this didn't really please a lot of people. They took to it quite negatively. There was a good amount of backlash as well. Now, her trying to mitigate this and trying to head it off was essentially going to Kotaku and giving an interview where she said, oh no, this isn't true. People misunderstand. I don't have as much money as they think. I never thought this would be as successful as it was. But again, going back to just some of the information that was found on NeoGAF, it's obvious that she expected it to get as big as it did. She viraled it by spamming it on her Twitter and different social media sites, which is actually contrary to Kickstarter's own rules. In fact, she's not just violating that particular rule, she's violating other ones. Kickstarter has very specific guidelines about what you can put up on Kickstarter and what you can't. Things about charity you can't do, things about supporting your lifestyle you can't do. You actually have to have a product or a service. And it would seem that Mackenzie's trip violates this, because not only is she asking for money to go to this RPG Maker camp, she's asking for money to replace a computer as well. So here's Susan Wilson, a wealthy entrepreneur, who's using a hot button issue and her kids to try to profit. And all the evidence seems to point to that. This would seem to be a classic example of somebody finding a way to make money by scamming a bunch of rubes and trying to make off like a bandit. And this seems to fit with a common motif, a common theme that's been going on recently. We talked about Adria Richards, and now we've talked about Susan Wilson. Each of them had different stories, but they both tried to use feminism and gender disparity to their advantage. Adria tried to use it to garner sympathy and to make herself more popular and to chastise somebody she was upset with. Susan Wilson is seeking to use it simply as a quick way to make cash. Now, media sites have done everything they can to support it. When you look at Adria Richards, you had Forbes and MSNBC, Washington Post and VentureBeat, all writing these long articles talking about how terribly oppressed she was. I mean, they spun that story in a way that was remarkable. If you were around right when it was starting to break, if you were around right when it was just starting to kick off, especially with the Adria story. You could see mainstream media and a lot of these different blogging sites spin this story. I mean, it's a common joke when people talk about mainstream media channels like Fox News. You know, the no spin zone is anything but. You know, Fox spins it so hard in favor of conservatism and the Republican Party that you can't ever get anything that's close to the truth. But what you got to see with the Adria story was really shocking. I mean, you saw it being spun from a tale about a woman trying to abuse her power into one of a poor, innocent woman being picked on by the patriarchy and how this needs to be stopped. And this was the narrative they gave it. And again, with Susan Wilson, the same thing happens. All this information is dug up about her past crowdsourcing ventures, about her businesses and her ethics and her attitudes. And what happens? Well, Kotaku, a Gawker-owned media site, who also hosts Jezebel, which is probably the most feminist site you'll ever see on the internet, does an interview with her, and it's a softball interview. They don't ask the hard questions. They don't confront her about any of the information found. It's essentially them kowtowing to her and letting her put out an appeal to say, oh, you know, this was a mistake. You don't understand, and I wasn't really trying to scam anybody. And they allowed this story to be put out. They didn't do any actual investigation. And Kotaku itself actually is a very good example of this trend that's recently happened, not just in covering this sort of thing, but in excusing this sort of behavior. Kotaku, over the last 2 years, has progressively become more and more leftist, more and more hardline feminist in their presentation of articles, which is extraordinarily awkward when you consider it's a video game blog. It's a site about gaming. But if you were to read any of the articles by Patricia Hernandez or Tina Amin, you would see that this site is anything but gaming. They talk about the patriarchy, they talk about white male privilege, about rape culture. It's very awkward. It's just very out of place. And so it's not surprising that Kotaku would be so forgiving in how they approach this interview, because this is the agenda they want to put forward. Feminism has become the panacea for the entitled people of the internet. It is the go-to solution for everything. If you make an ass out of yourself, cry feminism. If you do something wrong, cry feminism. If you don't get your way, cry feminism. That's all you have to do. Because immediately what will happen after you cry feminism, you will have a flood of people who will support you blindly, regardless of the facts of the situation. You can see this clearly with Adria and with Susan. After this information about their past behaviors and their attitudes were dug up, people still defended them. They said, oh, you don't understand. No, they're correct. They've been oppressed. Men are oppressive. The IT industry is sexist. Or people want Susan Wilson's daughter not to go to camp because they hate little girls. You know, this idea that there's some overarching enemy, that there's some mastermind villain who has a penis, who's out in the world somewhere, plotting the demise and the downfall of anyone who has a vagina. That's the narrative they put forward, and people eat it up. So sites like Kotaku and you know, certain authors on Forbes and MSNBC and all these others, they go along with it. It gives them views, and it supports the agenda they're putting forward. And really, it's just disgusting. It's disgusting that this has become acceptable. When you look at actual women's activists, people who really fought for actual issues. We're talking actual, you know, parity between the genders. We're talking about actual equal rights and civil rights. You know, people who put their lives on the lines and their reputations and their professions on the lines. It's a dishonor. It does them a disservice to abuse something that they worked so hard for. You know, feminism in its infancy was not a bad thing. It was co-opted by people and turned into this ugly, disgusting thing. And these two different women, Adria and Susan, are examples of how this has been perverted to fit any situation, to fulfill any need, and how people have difficulty identifying that and confronting it because they don't want to be labeled. You know, see, if you speak out against Adria and how she behaved, if you confront Susan and how she's behaved, you'll be labeled as a bigoted person, as a sexist person, as somebody who wants to oppress others, or the favorite new catchphrase is privilege. You're privileged, right? So you don't understand their plight. Privilege, as I've heard some people put it, and put it beautifully, is the left's version of original sin. You're born with it. You can't do anything to get rid of it. You're guilty of it, and you have to apologize for it. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's racism. But this is the ideology that's being thrown everywhere. It's being integrated into everything. And these two stories highlight that perfectly, and the media coverage surrounding them highlights that perfectly. Now, that's not to say that sexism doesn't exist. That's not to say that there aren't men who are complete assholes out there, because there are. But that's less to do with the fact that they're men and more to do with the fact that they're people. People are assholes. Trying to assign a general blanket statement and say that, all men are like this is ridiculous. It would be just as ridiculous for me to say all women are a certain way. Or privilege falls into that same category. But there has to be a point where people say enough, no more. We've tolerated this long enough, but this behavior is getting out of control. We cannot live in a society that's bubble wrapped for your safety. Rights don't end where your feelings begin. And if you can't interact with other people and deal with things that make you uncomfortable, that is your problem and not society's. And you can't go around blaming other people for it. Because face it, folks, at some point, the bullshit just has to end.